Banks which sold products linked to the failed Lehman Brothers say they will help vulnerable investors first. DBS, Maybank and Hong Leong Finance issued statements to that effect today, echoing an earlier call by Singapore's central bank. The Monetary Authority of Singapore said vulnerable investors include those over 55, poorly educated and first-time investors. But financial institutions have different interpretations of their own.
Hong Leong Finance says it will buy back Lehman mini bonds from main account holders who are over the government retirement age of 62. It will also do so for the poorly educated, defined as those with a primary school education or below. And Maybank says it has already identified Lehman mini bond investors who belong to the vulnerable group and has fast-tracked the review of such cases. But it declined to reveal its criteria for such vulnerable investors. Local lender DBS says it will evaluate the complaints of such investors on a case-by-case basis, but also did not give more details. Despite the lack of a common set of criteria, the efforts by the banks were lauded by retail investors.
The retirees and the old ones, the older people need help. And they depend entirely on this. They're not working. The younger investors are at work, all right? They can continue to earn income, continue to, consider their future in terms of other investments.
However, it is not clear what help affected investors outside of this group can expect from financial institutions. But observers say they can consider seeking redress through the Financial Industry Disputes Resolution Center, or FIDREC.
For a minimal charge for the administration, $50. Now, this by any imagination is, I suppose, is affordable and, should be taken advantage of by this group if they're not satisfied with their FIs.
He says FIDREC resolutions usually take about 6 months to complete, while going to court could take years.
And there are growing calls tonight for banks to compensate all investors who bought structured products linked to Lehman.
I found out that these people are actually professionals in tertiary education and people who generally do not fall within this group of vulnerable investors. If the banks takes the position that they wish to compensate the group of vulnerable investors because of mis-selling, I'm sure mis-selling must have occurred to the general population who bought these investment products as well.
And former NTUC Income CEO Tan Kin Lian also says that while it's an encouraging first step that banks are compensating selected investors, he hopes they do not neglect those who are not in the so-called vulnerable group. He feels they too were misled and deserve some compensation. He's proposing that banks bear half the losses at least. Mr. Tan's advice to investors remain unchanged, and he encourages them to first lodge a complaint and form groups with other investors to tackle the problem and only take legal action as a last resort.
It was business as usual at the 3 financial institutions that promised payouts. Channel News Asia understands the investors were given appointments for interviews, which explained why there were no crowds at branches. Hong Leong Finance and Maybank say they've contacted vulnerable investors, including the elderly and less educated. 63-year retiree Madam Tan said she invested 10,000 Sing dollars without knowing it was related to Lehman Brothers.
他跟我讲5%的利息有5年9个月他说你不要退出我说我明白
She said the bank would take a month to evaluate her case before deciding on the compensation. DBS says it would pay cash in cases where standards were not followed.
First thing would be non-disclosure. The inability to disclose clearly and accurately the product information. That would be first classified as misrepresentation. Now, the reps could also have explained the product wrongly, in which case they might have given the investor the understanding that this is guaranteed, there's no risk at all.
That's what happened to these sisters in their 40s who invested 160,000 Sing dollars through a CIMB broker friend.
He didn't talk about the Lehman Brothers. I never heard about it. It's only after the whole event. Then I get to know how complex this product is. I no longer have the kind of earning power that I had 20 years ago. It's really, really depending on this money that I would like to give it to my children for their children's education.
Tina said her sister was asked to sign up despite having an eye problem.
And she couldn't see the document. So the financial advisor actually write everything on behalf of her, and she just signed on the dot, even the check.
And since early October, the two sisters have lodged complaints with the relevant officials, including the Monetary Authority of Singapore. But the only response they've got are letters of acknowledgement.